Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. Nice to be with you again. In our current series on the pioneers in mind-body medicine, today we'll talk about an unusual American cardiologist, Dean Ornish, a cardiologist with a difference, who in the 1970s, when the world was obsessed with bypass surgeries, angioplasty, and even heart transplant as major advances in the treatment of heart disease, during that period of euphoria, which all these advances, these spectacular and very impressive advances had led to, in that period, he dared to talk about, not just talk about, but examine the efficacy of yoga in its widest sense, including its spiritual aspects, and demonstrate through painstaking studies, swimming against the current, that they could play a major role in the prevention and treatment of heart disease. So we'll talk about this person, Dean Ornish. In 1972, when he was 19, he joined the pre-medical class in a competitive college. It was a college in which only the toppers from various schools got in. And it was a college where people were reasonably sure that if they do well in this college, they're almost sure to get into medical school. But then came the professor of organic chemistry in this college, who announced in his very first class, this is a weed out course. Anyone who doesn't do well in organic chemistry never makes it to medical school. And organic chemistry is a subject which requires quite a bit of mugging up, remembering. And Dean Ornish was a person who did not like to remember things, he understood them. And as he says, as a cruel joke of nature, his roommate in the hostel had a photographic memory. And this led to an inferiority complex. And he soon came to the conclusion that since I will never be able to do well in organic chemistry, I won't make it to medical school. And he started worrying about it. Now that set up a vicious cycle. The more he worried, the harder it became for him to study. And the harder it became for him to study, the more he worried. And this went on. And on top of that, there was high parental expectation. As he says that my parents have always had high expectations from their children. And that is why they had named him Dean and his sister Laurel. And the result was that he started losing sleep. And once he had 10 sleepless nights in a row. He spent 10 nights without sleeping, spending the whole night looking at the hands of the clock every hour. And this is something which would drive even a normal person crazy. On top of that, he was already worried and going into a depression. And the result was that he thought he'll have to do something about his mental state. And having concluded that he'll never make it to medical school, he also thought, in any case, perhaps I'm not intelligent enough to make it to medical school. I'm stupid. And it's by fluke that somehow I have got into this competitive college. So he went to the campus psychiatrist and told him that I think I'm stupid. I don't think I'll ever make it to medical school. I don't know how I happened to be in this college. And the psychiatrist gave him some IQ tests. And after doing those IQ tests, he told him that, no, you are very intelligent. You are in the top 5% bracket in terms of intelligence. And what Dean Ornish told him was probably your tests are wrong. And he remained convinced that I'm not really intelligent and I'll never make it to medical school. But then, while he was going through this depression, one day he suddenly had a revelation of a spiritual type. It sometimes can happen in such states. And what was that revelation? The fulfillment of no worldly desire can ever bring lasting happiness. And therefore, he thought that all these dreams that I've had, that if only I become a doctor, I'll be happy. If only I make a lot of money, I'll be happy. If only I marry a beautiful girl, I'll be happy. If only I become famous by writing a bestseller, I'll be happy. If only I do some good research in medicine and make some discoveries, I'll be happy. These are all worldly desires which may get fulfilled, but none of them will bring me lasting happiness. All these are lies. So all that I have believed in so far will make me happy has been a big lie. And therefore, the conclusion was that if nothing in life can really make us happy, what is the point in living? And the next conclusion was quite obvious, that let me commit suicide. But then the question was how to do it. He thought that if I do it by, say, something very obvious like taking a poison or something, then people would think that he has committed suicide, he was a coward. So he hit upon a plan. He said that what I'll do is to pick up my car, drive very rashly, which in any case is very natural for a 19-year-old to do. And then I'll drive on a bridge when there's no traffic there, drive very fast, purposely swerve to one side towards the edge, and the car will go over the railing and fall in the river. And that's how I will die. People will think that it was an accident. I lost control over the car. But then before he could carry out his plan, he fell ill. He got fever, which was due to infectious mononucleosis. And in view of all the mind-body relationship that now is on such a scientific footing, one can say that that probably happened because his depression had led to low immunity levels, and this fever refused to go away. And therefore, he could not carry out this plan. He didn't have the energy to drive a car the way he had planned. So instead of doing that, he somehow went home to recuperate and felt like a complete failure, confessed some of what he was going through to his parents, and was still looking for an opportunity to die, find some way of dying. But then entered into the picture Swami Satchidananda, who was a yoga teacher in the United States. He had spent some time also with Sri Aurobindo. And by the way, Swami Satchidananda also called his yoga integral yoga. So how did he enter the picture here? Dean's sister, Laurel, had also gone through an existential crisis a few years earlier. And, those days in the late 1960s and early 70s, many young Americans were going through this phase, of being super saturated with material comforts and therefore feeling that, well, all this is of no use. And they wanted a different type of lifestyle, which would be more meaningful, more satisfying. But then they didn't know what the alternative to that lifestyle was, the one which they were accustomed to, the one which their parents had lived all their lives. And because of being frustrated with the way they were living and not knowing the alternative, many of them were getting drawn to drugs and so on and so forth. And, they really were going haywire. And during one such phase, Swami Satchidananda, he had brought her back on the rails. So his teachings had brought her back to rails. And while Dean Ornish was at home, what his parents did was to invite Swami Satchidanand home for dinner. And then they had arranged also a seat for him in the living room. And they requested him, Swamiji, before we eat, would you like to say something? Now, Swamijis are always ready with a talk. I'm not a Swamiji, but even I am most of the time ready with a talk, if not all the time. So Swami Satchidananda settled down on a seat and started speaking. And amongst the first thing he said was, the fulfillment of no worldly desire can ever bring lasting happiness. He said, this is something I've already figured out myself. But then he thought that Swamiji himself is looking quite happy. Perhaps he'll reveal the secret. So he listened to him very attentively. And the secret, as you might have guessed, came out something like this: quieten the surface, that is the surface mind. And of course, to some extent, the body is also important, which means try to put to rest the restlessness of the body and the mind including both the feeling and the thinking part. So let your volatile emotions and vacillating intellect quieten down. And in that state of relative peace on the surface, you'll discover true peace deep within you. Peace that comes not from getting something or from doing, but simply from being. Now, this was a revelation to Dean Ornish, and that changed the very course of his life. He went back to college and became inwardly defined. Instead of thinking in terms of the professor of organic chemistry who said that if you don't do well in my course, you'll never make it to medical school. Instead of looking at himself in terms of his roommate who had a photographic memory, he said, well, I am I. I'll study my way and give it my best shot. And then if I become a doctor, very good. If I don't become a doctor, even then very good. So, this intense desire to get something as something which was absolutely essential to his happiness disappeared. So he did not want it badly. And he knew that not getting into medicine will not be the end of the world. In any case, that is not going to bring lasting happiness, but then I can give it my best shot. And guess what happened? He not only graduated, he graduated summa cum laude, which means with the top distinction. And being the best graduate of the year, he gave the commencement address and he was accepted into medical school. And as he says in one of his books, The Reversal of Heart Disease, the less I needed success, the easier it became. The less I needed success as something on which my happiness was dependent, the easier success came. So he entered medical school, and as a medical student, what did he observe? Firstly, he observed that it was quite well known by then that the risk for heart disease goes up if a person takes a high-fat, high-cholesterol diet, if a person smokes. But then the very hospital which was treating patients with heart disease was selling cigarettes and hamburgers in its lobby. Another thing that he observed was that while the world knew that the risk for heart disease went up with this high-fat, high-cholesterol diet, with smoking, with lack of physical activity and mental stress, all these factors had been looked at one at a time. No study had looked at all these factors together. And what was most important was he realized that nobody has tried to see that if these are the factors that increase the risk for heart disease, can the reversal of these factors help in preventing and treating heart disease? Because these factors were not being considered while treating the patients. They were being given drugs, and if the drugs were not working, then they were treated by angioplasties and bypass surgeries and so on. And nobody was thinking of reversing the very factors which had led to the disease. And then because of a strong background in yoga in the widest sense, which he had by now, through his learnings from Swami Sachidananda and on his own, he could see that yoga has everything which a person needs to do to prevent and treat heart disease. And therefore, while he was still a medical student, in the year 1977, between his second and third year as a medical student, he took a year's break to do a study. He got a small research grant and started approaching cardiologists to refer patients to him. The doctors asked him, what is the title of your study? He said, Effects of Yoga and a Vegetarian Diet on Coronary Heart Disease. They told him, I love your study, but what do you want us to tell our patients? Should we tell them we are referring them to a Swami? So then he changed the title. Now he started saying the title of my study is Effect of Stress Management Techniques and Dietary Changes on Coronary Heart Disease. Now the title was acceptable, and they started referring patients to him. And he got good results, but it was an uncontrolled study, and therefore it was not very well received. In 1980, he once again took a break before beginning his internship and residency, and once again did another study, a better study. So he went on doing these studies and finally settled down for a program which he started calling Open Your Heart program. Open your heart to what? To yourself, which means acknowledge your own emotions, understand yourself. Try to understand who you are. Go deep within and establish a contact with your deepest self. Open your heart to others. Realize the oneness that binds you with others so that you'll feel love and intimacy. And open your heart to your higher self, a higher power, which the spirit of which permeates you and all the rest of the creation. So as you can see, this is a very spiritual approach to yoga. And the techniques that he put in, with of course this background, the techniques had to be more concrete, were yogic postures, which is perhaps didn't even call yogic postures, he just called them stretches. Other types of exercise like walking, etc. Dietary changes, and the dietary changes he introduced were rather severe, especially for treatment. No, he has two types of diets now, the reversal diet and the prevention diet. The reversal diet is very strict. It's a zero oil diet, and therefore sometimes also controversial. But all the same, the basic principles are right. And one can get a very balanced diet using the principles that he has talked about. And for prevention, he is less strict and the diet is more near normal. But anyway, it is essentially a variation on an Indian diet, high carbohydrate and low fat, just the reasonable amount of protein which a person needs, plenty of fruits and vegetables, high in fiber. And the result is that one of his favorite, ideas which he tries to tell people is that if you eat such a diet, not only it will be a healthy diet, you will not be able to overeat. Because this type of a diet is not very palatable. It takes time and effort to chew it, and therefore you can't overeat. So eat as much as you like, so long as you're eating the right type of diet. And then he tried to tell them not to smoke, avoid drinking. If you don't drink altogether, so much the better. But then a certain maximum allowance he fixed that in case you want to drink, this is the maximum that you should take. And visualization and guided imagery, that is visualize have a look at your angiograms, visualize that heat is entering your body, melting away the fats in your arteries are opening up, and so on and so forth. And stress management using the psychospiritual approach, open your heart to yourself, to others, and to a higher power. That's how he started teaching stress management. And the results were that the patients not only felt better, they also got better. What were the reactions to his studies? This can't be true. It can't happen. Then these people started saying it may be true, but perhaps it is because you are changing the diet of your patients. Perhaps it is because you are making them physically more active. Perhaps it is because you are telling them to stop smoking. But nobody thought it could be because of the reduction in stress. So, once again, there was a tendency to look at physical factors as the reason behind what was happening. And while talking about the reactions, he once again has quoted in his book, so he went on doing more and more studies. The first one was published in 1979 in a rather obscure journal, Clinical Research, then in better journals. And what made the waves was a study in the Lancet in 1990, which was a controlled study, about 20 patients in the experimental group, about 20 in the control group. The experimental group got the usual conventional care, which was standard treatment in medicine those days, plus his open heart program. And the control group got only the conventional treatment. And what he demonstrated was that the experimental group not only felt better, they also had an angiographically demonstrable reduction in the narrowing of the coronary arteries. So here there was very objective evidence, which did not happen in case of the control group who got only conventional care. This was a 1-year follow-up. Then he published a 5-year follow-up in the Journal of the American Medical Association, and in which he also demonstrated that there was an increase in the blood flow, which is actually what matters. It's not so much the narrowing which is important, narrowing of the arteries. So long as alternative channels have formed and the heart is getting enough blood circulation, the patient will do better. So the patients were not only feeling better, they were also getting better. And here is a pictorial representation of his paper in the Journal of the American Medical Association, 1998. This was a 5-year follow-up. And as you can see, on this side is the degree of narrowing of the arteries. Start with in both the groups, there was about a 40% stenosis, 40% narrowing of the coronary arteries, a 40% block. And this is the group which got only conventional care. At the end of 1 year, instead of 41.3, they had 42.3% blockage. And at the end of 5 years, with conventional care, they had 51.9% blockage, which means the blockage increased. So the narrowing in the control group increased by 11.8%. Whereas in the experimental group, which got the yogic intervention, lifestyle modification based on the principles of yoga, they experienced at 1 year a reduction from about 40% to about 38.5%, and then to about 37% at the end of 5 years, which means there was a narrowing was reduced by 3.1% in the lifestyle intervention group. Now, the differences may appear to be small, but they are statistically significant. And what is even more important is that the direction of change is just the opposite. While in the lifestyle modification group, the degree of narrowing has gone down, in the control group, it has gone up, and gone up significantly in a period of 5 years. Now, this was not significant just in itself. This was also significant because it was a revolution in the way doctors had been accustomed to thinking. When I was a medical student, the impression that we picked up while studying pathology was that it's only acute diseases like common cold and diarrhea that are self-limiting and heal on their own. For chronic diseases like heart disease, self-healing mechanisms don't exist. And therefore, these diseases generally keep getting worse with time, as is happening in this group. You may treat the person, so the patient may feel better, and the symptoms may improve, but the disease will not stop progressing. So that was the impression that was given. Now, here there was evidence for self-healing mechanisms being available in the body, even for chronic diseases like heart disease, provided you give them a good opportunity to work. And that opportunity was being provided by lifestyle modification, which was a holistic package looking at many things together, as you saw, and this led to a reduction. Now, if something so revolutionary happens, which is so contrary to the prevailing paradigm, then naturally it is very difficult to receive it, and that is why he got reactions like, it can't be true, and if it is true, maybe, then it is because of the physical factors like diet, exercise, smoking. Nobody thought it was because of psychological factors. And while talking why those reactions were quite justifiable, he has quoted a 16th century philosopher who said, whenever a new discovery is reported to the scientific world, they say first, it is probably not true. Thereafter, when the truth of the new proposition has been demonstrated beyond question, they say, yes, it may be true, but it is not important. Finally, when sufficient time has elapsed to fully evidence its importance, they say, yes, surely it is important, but it is no longer new. Now, one thing which is important here is that his treatment cost very little. And this is a comparison that he has made in the 1990 edition of his book, Reversing Heart Disease. A bypass surgery costs so much that insurance companies are willing to reimburse at least $30,000. For angioplasty, $7,500. But for teaching a patient lifestyle modification, which would cost only $150, they were not willing to reimburse. And if he teaches a healthy person lifestyle modification so that he be able to prevent heart disease, no question of reimbursement. You have to be sick to be able to claim medical insurance, which means that the whole system does not really favor prevention. And therefore, when I met Dean Ornish in the year 2003, he said that he was under the naive belief that as he collects more and more evidence, does better and better studies, gradually his approach will become mainstream. But that didn't happen because this type of an inexpensive approach does not suit many people. There are people, it hurts the interests of doctors and hospitals, and therefore it did not really become mainstream. And many doctors would not talk about it to their patients. Many would say that, well, even if we talk about it, who's going to listen? For people, it's much easier to swallow a few pills or to undergo a bypass surgery than to make all these drastic changes in their lifestyle. And when it comes to stress management, well, stress is an inevitable part of life. Who can be free from stress? So all this may be okay in theory, but actually doesn't work in practice. So that was the attitude that doctors would take and use that as an excuse for not even talking about it. And if they do talk about it, if they talk about it in 5 minutes, because essentially the lifestyle advice can be given in 5 minutes. Walk for at least half an hour every day. Stop eating non-vegetarian food. Take a high-fiber vegetarian diet, and stop smoking. Don't drink much anyway, and take whole grains and stop worrying about anything. The advice is over. Doesn't take even 5 minutes. But then if that is the way it is given, the patient will not follow it. Along with that, you give a few pills, he'll swallow the pills very faithfully, but the rest of the advice will be completely forgotten. Because we want only minor adjustments in our lives. The second important thing is that if you tell the person to do all this, he'll say, well, so the choice is between living a few years longer and giving up all the pleasures of life. So if by swallowing a few pills, I can continue to live the way I have lived all these years, I would much rather prefer that rather than make all these drastic changes in my life and give up all the pleasures of life. Now, what a yoga-based intervention does is to show the person that the type of life you have lived was actually not the most enjoyable type of life. You liked it because you did not know a better alternative. You fit a new lifestyle in a philosophy of life, where your priorities change, your goals of life change, and therefore, now the changes that you are told to make in your lifestyle are changes that you want to make. You don't have to make them. So what he said was that his approach did not become mainstream, primarily because inexpensive alternatives don't suit many people. So he said that, but there is one category whom it will suit. And what is that? The insurance companies. If they have to reimburse smaller amounts for the treatment of the same patient, why would they not love it? So he had started approaching in 2003 the medical insurance companies, and true enough, by 2010 he had achieved success, and Medicare began to reimburse costs for his program for reversing heart disease. And that is how his program really picked up. He has established a preventive medicine research institute near San Francisco at Sausalito in California. And that is sort of the headquarters, but he travels a lot. What he does is collects patients from a certain region of the United States, books a hotel for them, which is more comfortable and less expensive than a hospital. And he does not require all the hospital equipment for his program. So he books them in a hotel and then travels there and conducts his program, which usually is a 5-day program. His best known books are Reversing Heart Disease and another one, Love and Survival. When he talks of reversing heart disease, sometimes people misunderstand. They think that now the disease will be completely gone and we'll have arteries as clean as that of a newborn baby. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that the direction is reversed. Instead of progressing further, the disease starts improving. From 50%, it goes to 47% narrowing. It doesn't go to 60% narrowing, which in itself is a big achievement, or rather a big revelation, because medical science did not believe in self-healing mechanisms in chronic diseases like heart disease. And now we know this type of reversal can take place in a very large variety of other chronic diseases as well. His other book, again, a beautiful book, which is more general in nature, is Love and Survival. And here are a few of his famous quotes. Not diet, not drugs, not exercise, not smoking, not surgery, not even genetics. No other factor has a more powerful effect on health and premature death and disease than love and intimacy. People don't dislike change. They dislike being changed. which means that if you tell a person in 5 minutes, stop doing this and start doing this, the 5-minute lifestyle advice that I was talking about, they don't like, because you are telling them to change. So they dislike being changed. But if you tell them that it is in their own interest to change, they'll enjoy life more if they change, then they are willing to change. So it's not change itself that they resist. It's more the fact that you're imposing a change upon them, and they misinterpret it. They think that this change will mean going to a very dull and monotonous life just for the sake of living a few years longer. The need for love and intimacy, which he talked about in this quote also, that is the most important factor affecting death and disease. The need for love and intimacy is a fundamental human need. So it's that important in determining health and disease, because it is a fundamental human need, as primal as the need for food, water, and air. And love and intimacy not only fulfill a basic need, they also make life worth living if that love has the character of being universal and unconditional. As Sri Aurobindo says towards the end of Savitri, to feel love and oneness is to live. To live, that is to live a life that is meaningful, needs feeling love and oneness. Here is Dean Ornish with his guru, Swami Sachidananda. So that was the story of Dr. Dean Ornish, who was on the verge of suicide around age 20. And by the time he was 40, he was a world famous cardiologist. Some of the major resources that I used for preparing this talk is Dr. Dean Ornish's book, which is titled Dr. Dean Ornish's Program for Reversing Heart Disease, and of course his Wikipedia page, and drawn on many of the images through a Google search. We always love to hear from you. You may drop an email to yes@yesspirituality.com. Next week, the same time, next Saturday, on the 18th of June, same time, 6 p.m. Indian Standard Time, we'll talk about Bernie Siegel. He was the man who gave hope to patients having cancer. My gratitude to the mother and Sri Aurobindo for making these sessions possible. And thank you all for being there. Any questions?
Can I make some comments, sir?
It's a brief one, please. But time, we've run out of time already. 30.
Yeah, the only comment is all your lectures should be made essential part of medical students in first year itself. That is how the doctors of future will come out. Otherwise, they will be again mesmerized and hypnotized by the same what has been done for all these years. That's my comment.
Thank you. And in fact, you'll find that I've given a brief sort of story of all these pioneers in mind-body medicine as an epilogue in my textbook of physiology.
Yes, I know that. That's very nice.
Thank you.
Please continue to do so and for as many years as possible.
Any more questions or comments? Are there any questions in the chat? Seems there are no questions in the chat either. So we can close the session.
Doctor, can I have one question, please?
Okay.
Yes, please. Actually, this pertains to your last week talk, actually. And when we listen from you, that mind, body, this meditation, mindfulness, all sort of thing. I have a query, and it is in spiritual journey. I think I should be very clear that at some point of meditation, the breathing gradually stops also. So how this medical science could explain?
That can happen. Breathing may not stop completely, but at least it keeps getting slower, shallower, and keeps getting more and more subtle. That is because the oxygen consumption is going down. And that's what we saw last week while talking about Herbert Benson, that the relaxation response that is initiated by meditation leads to a sudden reduction in the oxygen requirement of the body.
Yeah, that's absolutely. But my little query was that in deep transcendental meditation also, I would like to share a little bit of my feelings actually and experience. And I've witnessed that in a little bit tend to be in some kind of samadhi state, as if I could feel that there is no breathing as such. So could it be possible to explain medically?
Yes, that's also possible. And perhaps that is what happens to the yogis who have continued to survive for several days at a time in underground pits where was no oxygen available. So control over autonomic functions like breathing and heartbeat is possible through yogic practices. But then that is not really the purpose of employing these techniques in medicine. And that is not the purpose of using these techniques even in yoga. Because these are side effects, things which happen by the way. In medicine, we are more interested in preventing and treating disease. In spirituality, we are interested in spiritual progress. In both, these remain side effects. The person doesn't learn yoga even when a person is on the spiritual path so that he can stop his heart or so that he can stop breathing and live without oxygen. That's not it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
There are no questions in the chat either. So we can end this session and hope to see you all again next week on Saturday at the same time. And we'll talk about Bernie Siegel, the cancer surgeon who gave a lot of hope to cancer patients and especially made a point that don't take away hope. You'll be doing a great disservice if a doctor tells the patient you are unlikely to live more than 6 months. That is taking away hope from the patient. And a patient who listens to the doctor and takes him very seriously will die unscheduled, whereas the one who defies the doctor and says, well, the doctor is not God, is likely to live longer. We'll talk more about his story next week.